Good evening, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here with you all and an honor to be here with my distinguished colleagues, Ana Maria and Rolando. I'd like to thank the Bildner Center, Mauricio Font, everyone involved with this event, and you all for coming out on a Friday night to support us. So I'm always a little nervous when I talk about Severo Surduy, because for experts, it's never enough, and for the general public, it's always too much. It's hard to find the sweet spot for him. I love him, of course, so I'll talk about him anytime. So Severo Surduy delves into the archive of Latin American literature and reconsiders some of its sacred texts, subverting foundational traditions such as the Novela de la Tierra and the Novela de la Selva. This talk will examine Sarduy's novel Calibri, Hummingbird from 1984, as an attempt at reinterpreting classics of Latin American narrative, such as José Eustacio Rivera's La Vorágine, 1924, and Rómulo Gallegos' Doña Bárbara, 1929. Surduy uncovers hidden and unrealized tensions in those novels, sexual, gender, and racial kernels, and highlights them as preoccupations of modern Latin American narrative. In Calibri, Sarduy's fifth novel, the author works with traditional narratives from Latin American letters, but at times infuses them with new characters and new twists. At other times, he attempts to burn the tradition altogether. At the end of this novel, the main character, Calibri, burns down the brothel in which he used to work, La Casona, becoming now its new owner in a repetitive cycle whose theme critics have equated with Latin American fiction's penchant for dictator fiction or the dictator novel. This is often taught as one of the dictator novels. As many readers are not familiar with Calibri, a poetic text that tends to veil itself, I'll briefly recount the main plot as best as I can for a novel that has no linear plot. So most of the action in the novel takes place in La Casona, a country bar or inn or brothel in the tropics. A new young go-go dancer named Calibri joins the establishment. He has black, kinky hair and black eyebrows, but his hair is dyed blonde, which gives him the appearance of El Dorado, as he's called. One of his first performances is a wrestling match with a young opponent called El Japoneson, with whom Calibri falls in love and escapes La Casona. La Casona's madam, La Regente, desires Calibri, he is her deseado, so a series of chases ensue. The escapees are eventually caught, and Calibri is brought back. He escapes again. This time, he manages to take possession of several spaces of his own to form a small band of followers and to conquer La Casona. He orders La Casona burnt to the ground once it's conquered. Much of the structure is destroyed, and La Regente, now called La Gerente, and her followers are either killed or converted, becoming minions of Calibri himself. Calibri becomes the new Regente, and El Japoneson just another servant of his. Calibri calls for another young man, or other young men to be brought in from the villages. So of course I know you're all dying to read this novel now. Right? It's out of print, so good luck, but you can contact me if you want a copy. So La Casona represents a liminal space between Latin American civilization and the jungle, where identity and the social norms can be fluid and multiple. This sanctuary, if you will, is a space for people and discourse to revel in the fluid nature of the self. The interior walls of La Casona are covered in winter scenes in the tropics, for example. Mirrors, often facing one another, abound. Much of the entertainment involves tableau vivant and agonic wrestling matches, and the prostitutes are transvestite men. Calibri, the main character, is at first unaware of his own multiplicity, believing himself to be a natural blonde, and in love with the true East, El Japoneson. His challenge is, if I can put it in general terms, to understand mestizaje. His natural impulse is to fragment reality into units of purity in order to understand it, to control it. At the end of the novel, we will see that Calibri leads an attack on La Casona, which at first seems to be a liberating act. Ultimately, however, Colibri sets up just another totalitarian order, both social and discursive. We are told on the very second page of the novel that, and I'm going to quote only in Spanish. I'm not going to translate into English, but if anyone would like the translations, you can see me afterwards. We are told that, y cito, los espejos simétricos multiplicaban al este y al oeste al ondulante cuerpo central. Bodies and cultures will be multiplied and viewed from both Eastern and Western perspectives. This is a text about desire for the unattainable and about the delusion of having attained something whose identity is mistaken. We are reminded of the early European explorers' search for the elusive fountain of youth or cities of gold, and about the proliferation of European misnomers for indigenous reality, often the superimposition of an Asian identity on indigenous reality in the Americas. Colibri is the golden one, his sobriquet is El Dorado, but this is only an illusion. After all, he is not a natural blonde. His eyebrows are, y cito, negras de azabache, como si pertenecieran a otro cuerpo. And his hair is engrifado, a sign that he is of color and not purely white. Nonetheless, when he is on stage and performing, he is pure art, mimetic, and desired. Colibri represents the legendary city of gold that motivated the disastrous Spanish expedition in the 16th century. He is the imperfect simulacrum of what is desired. Rather than desiring the japonesón, the Japanese young man, the denizens of La Casona desire what is not the East and what is not truly golden, Colibri. In this novel, their desire for the exotic, for the golden one, is really a desire for a local young man from the muddy town of the estuary, as we are told on page 13. The flaw in the character Colibri is that he believes his own myth. The themes of doubles and multiplicity dot the entire novel, especially within the space of La Casona. Usually they are conveyed by Surduy through the figure of the mirror, a Baroque trope. The first time we see Colibri in the novel, he is dancing nude between two mirrors, entre dos espejos. We instantly get an image of the infinite reproduction of his likeness within the facing mirrors. Other characters are similarly reproduced. The dwarf, and I quote, bailaba entre dos espejos, fascinada por la progresión al infinito. And the japonesón positioned himself, quote, para contemplarse entre dos espejos. Mirrors are also jarring and sobering. Colibri is frightened by reflections, quote, como atemorizado por un espejismo, while he is trekking through the jungle. But more significantly, he sees a grotesque image in a mirror of what he has become at the very end of the novel. And I quote, en ese espejo, en el que desde hacía tanto tiempo no se miraba en uno, corrió a mirarse Colibri. En el primer instante, como si detrás del mercurio apareciera otro. Fue su gesto de asombro lo que a sus propios ojos lo identificó. Dios mío, se dijo, cuánto pelo perdido, y estas cejas que no encajan con el resto. Olió todos los frascos con agua oxigenada que encontró en uno y un hisopo se tiñó las cejas. Colibri seems to enter a post-lapsarian world through the looking glass. He is first aware of his jet black eyebrows as though he were first becoming aware of his nakedness or mortality, as in the Judeo-Christian story of the expulsion of Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden, as an incongruity with the rest of his appearance. This is a significant anagnorisis in Colibri. He becomes aware of his multiplicity. He interprets it as his distance from his ideal essence, his aging, his mortality, however, not as multiplicity. This will put him on a path toward recovering his essence through a discursive purity. This belief in a rigid and controlling discourse will lead him, however, on his ineluctable path toward becoming the new regente. Rather than choosing to leave or to dye his hair black, he dyes his eyebrows blonde. It is as though precisely at the moment when he comes into his own, he starts believing his own myth. He is now El Dorado itself, and not just a desire or a legend that is mistakenly projected onto something or someone else. We see that Colibri's body is the locus for many things: desire, art, multiplicity, and also the archive. The archive in general is an important theme in this work. We see it in several adumbrations: the museum and funerary objects, reliquaries, ossuaries, sarcophagi, mausoleums, and tombs, newspaper collections, the flea circus, metal storage boxes, the pharmacopoeia, and most significantly, Colibri's body itself. After he tattoos himself, his body is referred to as the manuscrito. The novel's atmosphere is saturated with archival imagery or references. This abundance of archival references reinforces the notion that Colibri is itself an archive, Colibri meaning the novel, of a Latin American narrative tradition and of what that tradition leaves unsaid. Colibri contains several scenes and characters from the Novela de la Tierra and Novela de la Selva. These traditions are in the archive that Surduy raids, and from which he gets the origins of this novel. He returns to the literary forms at the origin and finds that there is already a formed origin. There is no pristine origin or tabula rasa with which to start, even at the presumptive heart of Latin America and its culture, the land and the jungle. Just as there was always already a presumed origin in Latin America itself. The search for the Far East, as well as the legal contracts entered into between Columbus and the Spanish monarchs prior to his first voyage in 1492. Surduy in Colibri infuses these telluric texts with new characters and new twists. We see a number of scenes, themes, characters, and direct allusions via quotations that share a limpid correspondence with some of the best-known novelas de la Tierra and de la Selva. La Regente herself reminds us of Rómulo Gallegos' character, Doña Bárbara. La Casona reminds us of Mario Vargas Llosa's La Casa Verde. The Venezuelan words catire, for blonde, and saperoco, for free-for-all, remind us of José Eustacio Rivera's La Vorágine, as does the quoting twice, but with slight variations, of Rivera's novel's last words, se las tragó la selva, and no se lo había tragado la vorágine. A direct reference to la vorágine, of course. The rubber workers, smugglers, and the illegal hunting of monkeys reminds us of the cruel expose we read in La Vorágine about the latex industry. Travel in a boat on a river covered with jungle growth reminds us of Los Pasos Perdidos. We also find scenic similarity to Los Pasos Perdidos in the quotation, había emprendido el camino de regreso, volvía sin saberlo, y por sus propios pasos a la casona, el sendero se perdía entre los peñascos de la ribera opuesta. We also see a lost city similar to Santa Mónica de los Venados from Los Pasos Perdidos. And this is at one point alluded to, and I quote, en medio del paisaje descubría una covacha desvencijada y luego otra y otra. Los restos de un caserío desamparado, una improbable ciudad. The most obvious plot summary, similarity to a jungle novel is the escape of Colibri and the Japoneson from La Casona into the jungle, paralleling the escape of Alicia and Arturo Cova into the jungle in Rivera's La Vorágine from 1924. The most obvious setting similarity to a jungle novel is La Casona itself, paralleling La Casa Verde, the bar and the bordello at the edge of the Peruvian city in Mario Vargas Llosa's La Casa Verde from 1966. And the most obvious character similarity to a telluric novel is La Regente, paralleling Doña Bárbara in Rómulo Gallegos' novel of the same name, 1929. So we have looked at many detailed similarities between these and other novelas de la tierra and novelas de la selva above, but now I will examine two of these works in particular. Analyses of Gallegos' Doña Bárbara and of Rivera's La Vorágine will reveal some of the subversions of these traditions that Surduy uses to reformulate the Latin American archive. Doña Bárbara is the living embodiment of the barbarism pole of the civilization and barbarism dichotomy that has plagued the Latin American literary tradition since the 19th century. In Gallegos' novel, we are told that she is an unattractive woman who is cunning and violent. She is a caudillo figure who behaves arbitrarily toward people until she falls in love with Santo Luzardo, whom she cannot have ultimately, and because of whom she is finally doomed. Significantly, she is also mestiza. Sarduy's La Regente is also described as an ugly, cunning, and violent woman. Actually, in all probability, she is a man who dresses like a woman. Her name is an obvious satirical, grammatical hypercorrection of the Spanish novelist Clarin's La Regenta. Surduy highlights one of the uncomfortable subtexts in Gallegos' novel, that Doña Bárbara's behavior and characteristics are manly, not just unladylike, but unwomanly. Surduy brings this to the fore by having his version of Doña Bárbara be a gay transvestite. La Regente falls in love with Calibri, an obsession that leads to her doom, just as Doña Bárbara's obsession with Santos Luzardo leads her to her end. La Regente, too, is the caudillo figure ruling a local area. Let us also not forget that I have already analyzed Colibri's racial characteristics in this talk. La Regente's obsession with him is for him as the golden one, as a brunette who has kinky hair, but is disguised, dyed, covered over. La Regente herself is described as having indigenous features and wearing white powder on her face, and I quote, "El rostro como el de un indonesio travesti senecto," and cubierta de polvo blanco. In Calibri, Surduy highlights racial and ethnic issues in Latin America. Doña Bárbara, the character, is symbolic of barbarism, as I said, in some measure because she is mestiza, not unlike Sarmiento's Facundo Quiroga, who is also mestizo, a caudillo, and the archetype of barbarism in Latin America. Colibri's fatal flaw is his black eyebrows because they do not fit his composite as the golden one. Nonetheless, he is able to dye these incongruous corporeal signifiers and to assume his rightful place at the end of the novel as the new regente. Surduy is also able to cover over his characters, plots, and themes, and to take his rightful place within the archive of Latin American literature. Tensions in Rivera's La Vorágine are also examined in Calibri. Racial others, such as Indians and mestizos, seem to be treated sympathetically, while women and ethnic others, La Turca Zoraida, are marginalized in La Vorágine. Also, homoerotic tensions explode in Rivera's novel, but are ultimately sublimated into heterosexual love. This novel from 1924 serves as a model of sorts for other telluric and jungle novels that are written later. It is also significant because of its muckraking expose of the rubber or latex industry's exploitation of marginalized people. There are numerous obvious parallels between Calibri and La Vorágine, among which are the two sets of lovers, respective escapes into the jungle, and the burning down of La Casona in Sarduy's novel and of La Maporita in Rivera's. I just mentioned some of the ethnic issues in La Vorágine, but there is also an intense homosociality and eventually a homoeroticism between men and between women. Cova recounts a homoerotic scene between Alicia and Griselda in the novel's second part. And I quote, "Cierta vez la niña Griselda, ausente yo, le daba clases de tiro al blanco. Sorprendílas con el revólver humeante y permanecieron impasibles, como si estuvieran con la costura. ¿Qué es esto, Alicia? ¿A tal punto has perdido la timidez? Es que las mujeres deben saber de todo. Ya no hay garantía ni con los maridos." That's Griselda's response. The erotic nature of the encounter is so obvious, smoking revolver, loss of shyness, knowing about everything, no guarantee even with husbands, that even Koba is taken aback as he feels his masculinity threatened with replacement by Griselda and or Alicia's sexual self-sufficiency. Male homoeroticism is even more explosive. Feeling jilted and abandoned, both Franco and Arturo Cova share a strong bond over their wayward female companions and the women's escape with Barrera. Tensions mount, generally until Arturo and Barrera fight at the very end of the novel. And I'll quote, no sé que en mí dijo que Barrera estaba en el baño. Hallábase desnudo sobre una tabla, desprendiéndose los vendajes de las heridas ante un espejo. Al verme, abalanzóse sobre la ropa a coger el arma. Yo me interpuse y empezó entre los dos la lucha tremenda. Aquel hombre era fuerte y aunque mi estatura lo aventajaba, me derribó. Pataleando convulsos, arábamos la maleza y el arenal en nudo apretado, trocándonos el aliento de boca a boca. Él debajo unas veces, otras encima. Trezábamos los cueros como sierpes y volvíamos sobre la ropa y rodábamos otra vez hasta que yo le agrandé con mis dientes las sajaduras, lo ensangrenté y lo sumergí para asfixiarlo como a un pichón. The homoeroticism in this scene, bathroom, naked, interposed between him and his weapon, convulsing, tight knot, exchanging breaths from mouth to mouth, he on bottom and then on top, we braided our skins, is patently obvious. And this is not the only place, there are others. I chose to quote one long quotation. In fact, if one does not read it carefully or within its full context, one could easily confuse this for a scene right out of Calibri. Surduy writes wrestling scenes, jungle escape scenes, and lovemaking scenes that are almost identical to this. He therefore reveals a homoerotic tension that builds up in La Voragine until under the guise of homosociality. In Rivera's novel, this homoerotic fight ends in Barrera's death and in the coming together again of Coba and Alicia. Even the enemy's name, Barrier, was an obvious impediment to heterosexual consummation. In Sarduy's version, the impediment is to the consummation of East and West and to the desire for El Dorado and its attainment. If these telluric and jungle novels represent the origins of modern Latin American literature, as both critics Roberto González Echevarría and Carlos Alonso assert in their respective critical studies, then Surduy is deliberately subverting that tradition while using its frame to enfranchise his own brand of modern literature and his own marginalized characters. Some of the reasons that are pointed to as these novels being the beginning of this modern type of literature are the kind of legal discourses used and the land reform and the kind of resolution of the almost perennial country versus city dichotomy in Latin America. Sarduy's actions do not come out of left field, however, because their seeds are already embedded within these telluric and jungle novels' subtexts. Surduy merely identifies and exploits these inherent tensions. The warning with which he leaves his readers is contained within the final scene in Calibri. The novel's eponymous hero does indeed destroy and supplant La Regente and La Casona, but he ends up replacing them in what we are led to believe is a vicious cycle. This theme has been identified with the Latin American literary tradition of the Dictator Novel, as I said before. Surduy shows how easily what is marginal one day can become hegemonic the next. The marginal and the pursued can become the dominant and the pursuer. We will remember the closing words of Calibri, both the novel and the character. And I quote, "A ver si traen dos o tres muchachos del estuario que bailen un poco para que animen esto." Toward the end of the novel, we also hear the chant, "Viva el que escapa del Codex," No? This could very well read, "Long live he who escapes from the archive, long live he who escapes the archive." The ultimate escape from the archive involves its destruction, but is there a mechanism in the archive that counters attempts to destroy it? Is Surduy trying to tell us that all destruction of the archive is doomed to end in a cyclical repetition of its precepts? Just as Calibri is doomed to replace La Regente and become the new dictator of both the brothel and the Latin American Dictator Novel? Is there no true escape from the power and allure of the archive? I leave you with these questions. I don't have your answers right now. Thank you very much.
I'd like to thank the Bildner Center, Wilfrido, for inviting me, and Mauricio Font for inviting me to present here today. My paper is divided into 3 sections, and I will begin the section called The Invention. And I think it's sort of appropriate that it begins with invention, since this week was Columbus Day here in New York, which of course he started creating all kinds of problems in the world in 1492, and he hasn't stopped since then. For those of us who worked in CUNY, because Columbus Day was on Monday, Tuesday was a Monday. You know, just like Cuba was Zipango or Japan, Cuba was Tuesday was Monday. So that's how Columbus still affects us. He's a great character, really is. In La Invención de América, or The Invention of America, Edmundo Gorman convincingly argues that America was not discovered but rather invented, since no such entity existed at the time that Columbus encountered the lands and the continent which he mistook for Asia. When it is affirmed, writes O'Gorman, that Columbus discovered the American continent by chance, just because he happened to come across some lands which he believed to be Asia. That is, when we are asked to accept that Columbus discovered the being of these lands, which he in fact mistook them for something else, what we're actually being asked is that we accept that these lands reveal their secret and hidden being when Columbus encountered them. End of quote. The tacit implication here is that we accept something akin to Heidegger's notion of the concealing and revealing of the truth of being. In other words, that Columbus, in godly fashion, just by perceiving and then naming the new lands, somehow brought them forth into the world. This notion, which O'Gorman often calls a priorismo, is at the heart of Western philosophical thought. We are here alluding, as you have guessed, to the very ancient and venerable idea of things in themselves, writes O'Gorman. In other words, that things are already constituted according to one unique reality, or to put it in more technical terms, that things are fixed in their being, predestined and unalterable for all subjects everywhere from all eternity. It was this metaphysical, dogmatic view of history that made it possible to postulate something as absurd as Columbus' discovery of America. In fact, as O'Gorman points out, in Columbus' proposal to the Spanish crown, there was obviously no mention of America. Columbus' voyage could not possibly be voyages to America, because no interpretation of the past can have, as would be the case with just laws, retroactive effects. In diametrical opposition to the view that America was always already there, waiting the revealing of its being by a world historical individual, America must be seen as a yet non-existent America, as what Surduy has often viewed as the potential of zero, the empty center of signification, or what I would call zero to the power of potentium. In any case, America was invented, and it was invented in the sense of, and Surduy is a writer that had, for being as postmodern as he was, always went back to the tradition and to the tradition of the Renaissance and the Baroque. And for him, the word invention has connections with rhetoric. And so we're looking here not just invention as something you physically invent, but something you invent through text. So if I may be permitted some philological discussion here, this goes back to Cicero's De Inventione and to Rodolfo Agricola's De Inventione Dialectica, where something is invented through discourse. There are moments in Serduy's text in the Donde son los cantantes where he actually takes excerpts from Columbus's diary and puts it in the novel as though they were part of the text. And the one that I particularly like, which I'd like to quote for you, because this is so good. This is really fantastic. I'll quote it to you. Do you want me to? Do you want in Spanish or in English? English. Okay. Yesterday, the sea was orange-hued and calm. We saw a school of sirens come near the ship. Some of them caught on the prow and kept us company during many leagues. The sailors threw them walnuts and hazelnuts, which they liked so much. It was joyous to see them frolic in the water. This is quite comical, especially when one considers that Surduy quotes from Columbus' diary in the Donde son los cantantes while ever attributing these passages to Columbus. And in Cobra, the Columbus passage is followed by a section that bears the title, The Gallant Indies, where a theater doorman announces, Esta noche en escena, tonight on stage, a real God. History and religion belong to the realm of performance and representation. Un Dios real, or a real God, is real only insofar as it is immanently and textually real. Since Cuba for Columbus was supposed to be Cipango or Japan, and the continent he discovered Asia, or particularly India, Surduy writes, with a red circle between their eyes, 4 thick girls are smiling, golden dentures dancing and beckoning to dawn on the proscenium. In the background, on a luminous float which climbs among celluloid clouds, the sun god appears with a slick mustache and golden circles on his cheekbones. At his feet, blinking spotlights of all colors, the throne of the Mahara, his favorites. Unquote. The voyages were never anything other than the enterprise driven by desire. Like Auxilio and Socorro are 2 characters from the Donde son los cantantes, which has been translated from, impossibly translated, but the best you can do, from Cuba with a song. You know? And what they do is they leave Cadiz and they go to in search of Mortal, who is this Christian general, when they reach Havana, what they encounter is the entry of Christ into Havana. And of course, there are allusions to Christ, the entry of Christ into Brussels from the painting by James Ensor, or the entry of Castro in Havana. Both of those things play into it. Christ becomes made of wood, turns into a figure made of wood, and with time and with all the consumptions, people trying to touch him, and he actually falls apart. And so they venture from Cadiz to arrive at Santiago de Cuba, where they have come to witness the entrance of Mortal, become Christ into Havana, a Christ made of wood that is slowly consumed to disintegration or death. Lo retratan más que una botella de Coca-Cola. They take more pictures of him than a Coca-Cola bottle. Christ had a certain Bruno in the Donde son los cantantes. And thus la entrada de Cristo en La Habana, or the entry of Christ in Havana, culminates in la entrada de Cristo en la muerte, the entry of Christ into death. During a snowfall in Havana, a fiction itself that gives way to the whiteness of a page where anything can be inscribed, and especially the dream of ontological origins. One of the first lines in the Donde son los cantantes is this wonderful line, which is impossible to translate. Metafísicas estamos y es que no comemos. Vámonos al self-service. Mario metaphysical, we must be hungry. Let's go to the cell service. Cry out the transvestites, auxilio and socorro, or help and mercy, in from Cuba with a song. And off they go to the self-service restaurant where they will have to negotiate their identities with the help of fixed metaphysical categories of being. Here, unlike with Kundera, what is unbearable is the heaviness of being. And so begins the Donde Son los Cantantes with an affirmation of lightness, of pájaros, the Cuban slang for gays dressed in feathers. The first lines of the novel is pluma, sí, deliciosas plumas de azufre. And with this, the novel begins. The humor of this passage in a novel about Cuba's multicultural history is unique in the history of literature. Nervous and hysterical Auxilio and Socorro venture out amidst a number of literary citations that recall in the most irreverent way Surduy's own literary origins in the Spanish Baroque. Auxilio parta las mechas, se asoma quevediana, writes Surduy, and says, polvo seré, mas polvo enamorado. I will be dust, but dust in love. Del poema claro de Quevedo. The Caribbean conventions, as Surduy calls it, is about Cuba's three existing cultures. And I'll cite this in English. Three cultures at least have been superimposed to constitute the Cuban. Spanish, African, and Chinese. Three fictions alluding to them constitute this book, says Surduy in an ironical note at the end of the novel. These three cultures that make up Cuban identity, says Surduy, constitute Cuba as a fiction. And he adds to the mix, since missing from Cuba are the Taínos that were wiped out of existence, the indeterminate fiction of the transvestite, who is in fact a fiction of a fiction, the category of woman. The $64,000 question, says Socorro, as she puts on her makeup, is la definición del ser, the question of being. But just as she says this, she immediately negates the possibility of such a definition. Se acabó lo que se daba. Esta es la situación. Nos hemos quedado y los dioses se fueron. Cogieron el barco, se fueron en camiones, atravesaron la frontera, se fueron todos. The gods have left. The gods have left, declares Socorro, in echo of Heidegger's conclusion that the gods have departed, which is why we have forgotten to consider the question of being and the being of being, etc. And Auxilio responds, calla, eso quería, que te trague el ser, que a tu alrededor se abra un hueco, que te chupe la falla lacaniana. Auxilio wishes Socorro que sea absorbida por inadvertida, in a statement that reminds us of Tirso de Molina's condenado por desconfiado, which in this case can either mean that she deserves to be swallowed up by being or that she deserves to be punished for no longer believing in the gods. In the Dolores Rondon monologue, in which she confronts her imminent death, the cabaret singer regrets not having believed in the gods. No creí, no creí, no abrí la puerta. These are all, and this text was written the Donos los Cantantes was written in 1960, was published in 1967. This text it's a response in many ways to Heidegger's interview in the magazine Der Spiegel in 1966, in which Heidegger was still talking about the mission and the destiny of the German nation. It is amazing to think that after the Holocaust, you would have a venerable philosopher like Heidegger talking about the origins, the wonderful, grand origins and destiny of the German nation. So here Surduy is poking fun of this. And I cite from Heidegger's book, Introduction to Metaphysics. Germany is the most metaphysical of nations. We are certain of this vocation, but our people, my emphasis, will only be able to wrest a destiny from it if within itself it creates a resonance, a possibility of resonance for this vocation, and takes a creative view of its tradition. All this implies that this nation, as a historical nation, must prove itself, and thereby the history of the West, into the primordial realm of the powers of being. These digressions are important because they point to the philosophical political import of Surduy's deconstruction of the ontology of origins and his textual parody of Cubanidad. For the German philosopher, transnational destiny of the fatherland as a leader and savior of Western culture was inextricably connected to his close kinship with the Greek language. Heidegger, the philosopher of the poem of the saying, viewed Hölderlin as the intermediary of the Greco-Romantic tradition, of the forgotten tradition of being. Y así es. Surduy va a hacer burla de esta idea de los orígenes de la cultura. En cierto modo, sorry, I'm speaking in Spanish. Wow. In a lot of ways, the people have, one of the things people said about Surduy is that he's actually he breaks with the magazine, with the group of Orígenes, because he's actually breaking with the father figure Lezama. I think that's just too psychoanalytic and just too trite to be the case. I think Surduy breaks with that because Surduy breaks with it for very deep philosophical reasons. I think he doesn't buy the idea of ontological origins, of deep origin, la cubanidad as something fixed and historical, as would Heidegger. And the last section of the article, we're coming to this, is Cuba simulated in cross-dress. In what is, I think, one of Surduy's most beautiful texts, and is a radio play called Los Matadores de Hormigas, The Ant Killers. And it's a text which takes place in Portugal, and it's a text that begins with this, and I'll read this, the very beginning of the text. So this takes place in Portugal, on a solid blue background, bright acrylic, overexposed, pasted, cut up, with a close-up's clarity. A striped colored fabric is unfolding slowly, opening like a flower in slow motion. Plain geometries, blood red, chlorophyll green, plain, like paper cut by children. But Portugal, the locus of the action of this play, is in effect an acrylic painting. And just as there is no Cuba in the Donde Son los Cantantes, or From Cuba with a Song, but a Cuba of writing and pictorial images, the Portugal of Los Matadores de Hormigas, the Ant Killers, is a Portugal of flat surfaces, of canvases, of overexposed photographs and cut-ups, of souvenirs, T-shirts, of plain geometries of red and green stripes. And because it is the Portugal of representation, it is the Portugal of colonization. The country to the west of Spain that had control over Guinea, Mozambique, and Angola until 1974. Colonies that deprived of their national cultural identities, colonies represented by the Portuguese flag. And Cuba, for Surduy, is no different. It's not the locus of myth or of originary depths, but rather of surface inscriptions and disguises, often for consumption by another for whom Cuba does not exist as a product. Does this mean that Cuba does not or did not exist for Surduy? That Cuba was somehow a receptacle of some kind of postmodern nihilism? I don't think so. Once when asked by Gustavo Guerrero how important el país natal, his birthplace, was for him, Surduy answered this way: Nada me preocupa más, ni me aflige más que Cuba. Nada está más presente. Nothing preoccupies or afflicts me more than Cuba. Nothing is on my mind more than Cuba. And I believe him. I take him at his word. For I myself, unlike others who have made entire careers creating all kinds of politicized mythologies of Cuba, left and right, have not ever had any interest in writing or talking about Cuba. Cuba is one of the countless places where I am not at this moment, but it is real. It is a place where people live and where its inhabitants have to negotiate life as anywhere else on a day-to-day basis. Jean Baudrillard, the French philosopher, incensed a lot of people when in 1995 he published a book entitled The Gulf War Did Not Take Place. But he was right. For most people of the world, the exception being those who lived it, the Gulf War did not take place, except as a television show made possible by CNN. And in Los Matadores de Hormigas, or The Ant Killers, a German tourist in the Spanish version and a French intellectual in the English version enthusiastically remarked that the news of the April Revolution made many Germans or French change their vacation plans. This is the version in Spanish, and I'll read to you the version in English. Como todos los alemanes, según se anunció la Revolución de Abril en Portugal, cambiamos nuestros planes y decidimos ir de vacaciones a ver el nuevo régimen, como un hotel de 3 estrellas o un exotismo más. Ahora la versión, now the version in English. Just like all the French leftists, we changed our vacation plans when we heard the first reports of the April Revolution, and decided to go and see the new regime as if it were a matter of a 3-star hotel or something really quaint. End of quote. The Cuba of tourists, intellectuals among them, is just like that. A vacation destination that even includes tours of Cuba's architectural ruins. And this is a fact. The other Cuba, however, is the one Surduy tells Guerrero is always on his mind, the one that afflicts him. And so this afternoon, what we have brought you here is the real Cuba. Thank you.